Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back for a while to the Sales on Demand show. I know it's been a minute since I've released a new episode, but today you're going to find something great here. This is episode 138, and we're going to talk about avoiding burnout by downsizing your life. Yeah, we're going to be talking about this, and I may be bearing a little bit of my soul in this episode, so we'll see. It's almost the end of summer. It's the tail end of August. The leaves are already turning those nasty colors and falling off the tree, which, I know that people are like, oh, I love fall. It's so beautiful. I love the colors. I prefer spring because then I know that the entire warm season is ahead of me. But fall, it just reminds me that winter is coming, and I don't like the death of things. So the leaves falling off the tree just reminds me, oh, the tree's going dormant. So you have to forgive me if I just don't find this romantic feeling from fall just because it reminds me that it's going to get cold and it's going to be winter, and we don't really get much of a fall here in Canada just because it can start snowing almost immediately and frequently does. Although we can also have fairly nice weather throughout September and October, so you really don't know. It's the unknown part that kind of makes it frustrating, but nevertheless, it's just what happens every year. So I feel that sense of nostalgia, like, oh man, I didn't get to do everything I wanted to do during the summer. And I try to find a little bit of time to get out there and do just one more thing. But work tends to swallow up most of my time anyway, so, that's the way it goes. But I did have a pretty good summer. Did have a really good summer. It is always a bit of a challenge to make episodes during the summer, just because the day that I've picked for this just tends to be really busy. Wednesdays is the day that I like to release my show, and Wednesday usually is the day that I take to do outdoor chores and stuff like that. It's like, okay, well, I'm replacing a door, I'm putting on a screen door, I'm just doing stuff, and so it swallows up the time, and then I just basically get too busy or lazy to do it. But that's just summer. Summer is always a little bit of a slow period. So now that we're back in a fall period, or we're almost past summer, should be pretty regular going forward. I'm still training, still doing a lot of running, and I'm looking at running my first half marathon in October, which I'm kind of excited about, but also nervous because this represents a massive amount of effort, more physical effort than I've ever put into anything, and I've been in the military for 11 years. Even the things that I did in the military, I don't think will be. They might be the same amount of challenge, but this is the first time that I've ever willingly gone and done something so insane as running a half marathon. And it's really not insane. I guess people run half marathons all the time, but for me, this is a big deal. So I've been running a lot, and it takes a lot of time, right? There's no way that I could have done this if I had a full-time job, like a real full-time job where you go for 8 to 10 hours a day, because it just takes, if you want to go on a training run, that's like 3 hours. Like yesterday I went on a 15-kilometer training run, and it just ate up more than 3 hours of my day. It was almost the entire morning. So, it's good, but honestly, I'll be glad when I get this done with, because it's hard. I had blisters on my feet yesterday. I'm like, I need a couple of days to recover here. This is really pushing my body to the limit. But I enjoy it. I really do. I just find this whole thing to just be a big part of my personal growth. But today I want to talk about the decisions that you make about what to do and how to decide whether something is worth doing or not worth doing. And we're going to talk about some flaws and some strengths about entrepreneurs that I see all the time, particularly in myself. So let's dive in, and we'll start with the flaws here because we always love to talk about flaws in ourselves. I don't know. I find this to be an endlessly fascinating topic. I love self-examination. I like to poke and prod around my brain to find where I'm falling short so that I can fix it or try to fix it. And it's really important for personal growth. I'm a huge, huge fan of personal growth, and every entrepreneur should be or is already a fan of personal growth. I'm assuming that everybody listening to this podcast, you're constantly looking for ways to improve yourself. That's why you're listening to this. Otherwise, you'd just be watching Netflix and you wouldn't really care about personal growth. So I'm assuming that you care about this because you're listening to the podcast. So let's go through some flaws. And, tell me whether you find these flaws in yourself or not. I'm going to talk about some ways to fix these flaws, and then we're going to talk about strengths and some of the drawbacks of these strengths as well. So it's a little bit of a yin and yang. There's a little bit of good in every bad and a little bit of bad in every good. It's all about balance, but you need to find that balance. So number one flaw in entrepreneurs is that entrepreneurs are starters and founders. They love starting things. Nobody is as good at starting a business as an entrepreneur, but they struggle to scale it. So they really find a lot of satisfaction in building something from the ground up and, breaking that ground, right? But they can't scale it up. They can't finish it. And I see this all the time where people will purchase a training program and they get so excited about it. And they keep, they're just motivated for, weeks at a time. And it's all they think about. They dream about it. And it's not necessarily just entrepreneurs. A new job can bring this new excitement, or a new relationship, or something that's just kind of a new thing. It's like new ground that you're taking over. And they struggle to maintain it once the newness kind of wears off. And that's number two flaw is that entrepreneurs love and prefer new ideas, and they will often give preference to new ideas over proven old ones. So the first flaw is often called shiny object syndrome. And I guess these two flaws are quite related to each other. I mean, you could probably have rolled them into one thing. To me, they seem like two different things. But if you decided that you disagreed with that, I wouldn't necessarily think that you're wrong about it. But really, the trick is when you become an entrepreneur, you're going to constantly be pitched to. So you're going to have people and other, entrepreneurs try to pitch you business ideas. And you're going to get this on Facebook. You're going to get this through your email. You're going to get this on podcasts. You're going to have somebody try to pitch you some way to make money or some way to build a business. And they're going to be like, man, I want to teach you all my secrets. I've got all this, I've got this strategy that really works well. And I'm not saying that they're not telling the truth. I'm really not. I mean, I know people are making money online there's just easily, 50 different ways to make money online. Some of them might be more sustainable than others. I happen to think that print on demand is probably one of the most sustainable and long-term ways to build income, but it's not the only one. The thing is that when you start something and you don't finish it, then there's no point starting something else because you're not going to finish that either. So if you've picked something to do, don't abandon it to start something else. And just because someone has a new idea or a new way of doing things does not mean that you should abandon the old way of doing things. So this actually applies, like when you've already, decided to do a business and you're like, okay, I'm going to do print on demand. And somebody comes and says, okay, I've got this really new way of doing print on demand. And you're like, well, I haven't really mastered this old way of doing it, but I know other people have. Well, that's not necessarily a smart thing to do, right? You should first try the proven ways. You should first master the proven methods before you try new and experimental things. I see this all the time with students who they just get distracted with so many things that they can sell. So, for example, I teach students how to do mug designs, right? So I tell them, okay, start with the simple, find a funny phrase, pick a niche, and take the funny phrase and put it on a mug. It's really easy to do. You can make a design in literally 30 seconds because all you're doing is typing the phrase into a some kind of graphic design software, and then you download it and launch it. And they say, "Oh, that's cool," and they try it like 3 times, and then they say, "Well, what about selling jewelry? That looks like a good product." And I say, "Well, hang on. Jewelry is really complicated. It's much more complicated than mugs. Like, don't jump into something that is much more complicated if you haven't mastered the simple stuff first. Just like if you were doing martial arts and your sensei is trying to teach you how to punch, and you're like, well, I just teach me how to roundhouse kick. Well, you don't know. That's not how it works. You can't learn how to do a complex maneuver if you haven't learned how to do the simple ones first. So don't jump into new untested things until you have really mastered an old and proven technique first. And the second thing is don't fall for sales pitches. You're going to get a lot of sales pitches. They're going to promise you the moon, and they're going to say, "Oh yeah, no, this is great. This, millions of people are making tons of money right away off of this." Yeah, don't fall for that. They're not necessarily true, and especially if they promise that it's going to be easy, it's probably not the case. Nothing is ever as easy as it sounds. All right, so number 3 flaw is capacity. Entrepreneurs frequently overestimate their capacity. So what is capacity? Capacity is just how much you can handle at any one time. If you've ever worked with, coworkers and you've seen them kind of fall apart when things get stressful, you've actually watched somebody, go over their capacity in real time. I see this quite frequently with kids. Some kids just don't have the capacity to handle responsibility, right? When you give them responsibility, they just can't handle it. Or you give them some jobs to do. So you tell a kid, okay, I want you to empty the dishwasher and sweep the floor and mop the floor. Well, the kid might be willing to or able to empty the dishwasher, but they don't have the capacity to do anything more than that, right? So you have to be very aware of your own capacity. And this is the thing with entrepreneurs, is they frequently overestimate how much they can handle. So, for example, you might have a full-time job. And when I first started doing print on demand and entrepreneurship, I had a full-time job. It was full-time, but it actually gave me quite a bit of time off. So it wasn't as bad as, let's say you're working 9 to 5 every single day of the week and you just have weekends. I had, gaps in work that were 4 or 5 days long. So I had capacity. But the trouble was that I was already doing a bunch of stuff in those 4 or 5 days off, or 3 or 4 days off. So, we were trying to run and build a farm, and so I had farm chores to do, cutting wood for the fireplace, and I didn't just exceed my own capacity, I turned my capacity into a joke. Now, it worked out in a sense, but I could have been more effective if I had reduced the number of things that I was doing and focused more on the things that were the most productive. So the truth is that a lot of people think that they're multitaskers. They claim they're like, "Oh, I can multitask. I can do a bunch of things at the same time." The truth is that you're not really going to do a very good job at those things if you try to multitask. People will always overestimate their ability to multitask. Multitasking is not something that you should be trying to do. If you are working full time, then starting two businesses is silly. One business and a full time job is just about the extent that most people can handle. I've never seen anybody be successful at doing two businesses or two different kinds of the same business and doing a full time job. And the same goes for when you're starting something. Don't start something else at the same time. And this, again, all of this comes from my own experience. So when I first started doing, print on demand, I was already doing something else. I had purchased another program that was talking about how to sell products through Facebook ads. And then I started doing print on demand. And so I was trying to balance these two things at the same time. I'd spent a bunch of money on the training, and I just was overwhelmed by the amount of work required to do both of them. So it turned out that the Facebook ad one was not very successful. Even if I had committed a lot of time to it, it probably wouldn't have turned out to be very successful anyway, because it was pretty expensive. But the print-on-demand one, I should have devoted more time to that, because I could have built this up much faster. So basically, you just need to learn how to say no. And I know this is a cliche, it's a trope, but it's true. It doesn't make it not true that people say it a lot. And, I mean, I'm in the middle of basically downsizing my life. So I'm sure you probably heard me talk about this, but a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago, I joined the armed forces again. And I was thinking to myself, well, I just wanted to be part of that. I wanted to see if I could do it. The problem with being in the armed forces is that it is both a part-time job and a full-time job. The pay is basically non-existent. Now, if I had nothing else to do, if I just had a full-time job and no other business, that might be fine. If I had weekends free, that would be okay. If I could basically take 7 weeks off at a time and go do training, that would be fine. But I can't. I don't have the ability to do that right now. So instead of trying to make both things work, I'm saying no to one of them. I'm basically leaving the military. And it was a hard decision, but it was the right decision. So that was my last year, my final year, and now I'm done. I'm going to turn my uniform in, which is going to free up a lot of space in my basement, of course, because there's a lot of uniform and gear that they give you in the Army. But it was kind of melancholy. I was kind of disappointed that I couldn't make it work, but at the same time, I know that that's not my future. Being in the military is nothing more than a vanity project. It's just basically, your uniform looks great and you have the pride of saying you're in the military, but it wasn't contributing anything to my future. I had already proven that I could do it. I've been doing it for 11 years. I'm like, okay, well, I don't have anything else to prove here. I've proven to myself that I'm still capable of doing this, and it's time to just make a graceful exit. So that's basically saying no. And it's hard to do, especially if you're someone who just loves starting new things and tackling new challenges, but you have to learn how to do that. I had to do the same thing again this summer when I was thinking about going and getting a private pilot's license. And I still am interested in aviation. I really am. I love planes. I've always loved flying. I've loved the idea of flying. But again, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of money. And I can already tell. I didn't even have to start it. The minute I started thinking about it, my brain said, that is beyond your capacity at the moment. It's going to be beyond your budget too. Like $15,000 to get a private pilot's license minimum. And then what? What do you really get out of that? I mean, you buy a plane and start flying it around, and if you do, then what's the purpose of that? Like, is it just for fun? Is it something else? And my mind was telling me, okay, you already have a hobby. You go to the gym and you run. Those are your hobbies. That's all you've got time for. And realistically, that's the truth, right? Um, when you start to, go to the gym and try to become fit, it does take up a lot of time, but it does provide a very real benefit to your life, meaning that you get healthier, you look better, you feel younger, no more pain and, sore joints or anything like that. So there's real benefits to that. And that's something that's definitely worth getting into. But you can't just say yes to everything. You have to say no to some things. Even if they would be worth doing, they may not be worth doing for you. All right, so let's talk about some of the strengths that entrepreneurs have. And we'll talk about how sometimes these strengths can end up being weaknesses if you overbalance in these areas here. So, number one strength here is that entrepreneurs tend to be self-taught, there's another word for this that's called autodidact. And I love using these big Greek words because it makes you sound smarter, but it's basically another word for self-taught. So, I mean, entrepreneurs excel at teaching themselves things that either nobody else knows how to do it, or they just don't need someone to teach them how to do it. I've always been an autodidact. I've always been somebody who can teach myself how to do things. I learned how to basically speak French by myself. I've just taught myself so many different things, and not all of these things are extremely useful things to know. I mean, learning how to speak Chinese is not super useful when you're living in Canada. I mean, it's kind of fun, but it's not productive. But it is fun to do it. The fun part is why I do it. Teaching yourself something is a lot of fun. And I'm very good at teaching myself. Now, the problem is, if you spend all your time teaching yourself, you can't possibly teach yourself everything. You still need to have mentors in your life, especially when it comes to business. Everybody needs business mentors. You are not an island. And even if you're good at what you do, and I am good at what I do, like, there's no question that I'm good at coaching, I'm good at selling. Like, my mentors are the people who are literally the best at this. The people who are making millions of dollars at this. And even they have mentors. And their mentors are just other people who are even more successful, or who are the same level of successful as they are. I believe somebody said, I don't know who said this, that you kind of become like the 5 people that you spend the most time with. So if you spend time with people who are successful, you will become successful. You'll be more successful. If you spend time with people who do a lot of complaining, then you're going to start complaining. And I've really noticed this. When I worked in law enforcement, I got to tell you, nobody can bitch and moan as much as people in law enforcement. They are extraordinarily talented at complaining. They complain about everything. They're like, oh, my department doesn't support me. Oh, the public is stupid. I mean, yeah, both of those are true. But it's just complaining about something you can't change. And it's, the military is awful for this too. And rightfully so, because, again, the government running, the armed forces, that's the worst possible way to do it. You'd be better off giving a bunch of baboons pointed sticks than you are trying to have the government, procure helicopters, and then 20 years later we still don't have helicopters. Like, it's awful. But complaining about it doesn't fix the problem. And spending time with people who complain, it's just going to make you a complainer. So if you're in the situation where you're just spending a lot of time with complainers, Get out of that situation and get around people who, instead of finding problems, they find solutions to problems, and they're confident enough to know that they will tackle these problems. They don't deny the existence of problems, but they tackle the problems and they find solutions. And that's what I've been focusing on this year. So be willing to learn from others, even if you are good at being self-taught. Number 2 strength is motivation. And this is interesting. I see this a lot with people who are new to entrepreneurship. They get super motivated. Nobody is as motivated as a hungry entrepreneur. They are just a machine. Now, the problem with motivation is that it's an emotional response, right? You feel that motivation. It's kind of like when you're running and you turn on some good music. I don't, if you guys have ever done any running or biking or anything like that, you'll probably know that music is a strong motivator. Like, it really, really helps when you're on a long run or something like that, or you're on a hard run. It gives you this emotional burst of energy, and it helps you go a little bit further. But motivation can't last forever. It's impossible for motivation to last forever. It eventually falters, and it needs to be replaced with something. And what you replace it with is called discipline. Yeah, I know, it's an ugly word, right? It's like discipline. Meh. I hate being disciplined. I'd rather be motivated. Well, you try your motivation. I'm going to try out my discipline. So this comes in, motivation falters, and you often will lose motivation. And everybody's looking for that secret sauce to how to motivate yourself to do things. Well, there's no secret sauce. Motivation falters, and sometimes you just can't get it back. And what you replace it with is discipline, habit, and organization. Instead of being motivated, you're disciplined. So for me, like, going out and going for a run has nothing to do with how I feel. I'm not motivated to run. I'm disciplined. It's like, this is what I do. And it's not a matter of I feel like going for a run. It's a matter of habit. Like, this is what I do. It's a core part of my literal existence. And it doesn't matter how I feel. And if I'm feeling poor, maybe my run won't be as long and it won't be as hard, but I still go. And that's what habits produce, right? So you need to get rid of the idea that you need to be motivated. And you need to replace motivation with discipline and organization. So on the flip side, be careful of sticking with something out of habit rather than purpose. So this can apply to a lot of different things, right? So let's say that you're sticking with a job that you hate out of habit rather than purpose. Or, you've decided on a career path, and you're like, okay, well, I've already been trained how to do this thing, and I'm sticking with it, even though I know that I hate it and I just don't want to do it anymore. And that was kind of how I felt with law enforcement. I was sticking with it out of habit rather than purpose. I knew that this wasn't my purpose. I was reasonably good at it, but I'm like, I can't picture myself doing this for the rest of my life. I don't want this to be my lifetime. I'd rather do something more, less violent and less, I'm tired of working for government and all that stuff. So I was sticking with a lot of things out of habit rather than purpose. And the same was also true for when we were living on a farm. I had spent a lot of time, invested a lot of money in building this farm up, and it just wasn't working very well. Rather than giving up and leaving, I was sticking with it because I was like, I have to make this work. I have to make it work rather than quitting and all of that work going to waste. There's something here called the sunk cost fallacy. You might have heard that before too. I'm using a lot of these tropes and common things, but maybe you haven't heard these before. Sunk cost fallacy is when you've sunk a lot of time and effort into doing something and you're reluctant to quit because of that time that or the cost that you've put into it. Now, on the flip side is when you invest in something and you're like, I'm not giving up because I've invested in this and it's a good idea. That's not sunk cost fallacy. That's just discipline and motivation. But there are some times when you'll find that something just isn't working and you need to quit rather than continue to not have it work for you. All right, number 3, strength that entrepreneurs have is risk taking. Entrepreneurs have something called low time preference, which means that they are willing to suffer in the present for potentially unknown future gains, right? When you go and take a job, that's high time preference. You're not willing to work for more than 2 weeks before you get a paycheck. You're just like, I just want to get paid. I know I'm going to get paid this amount, before taxes or whatever, and then taxes take a little bit out of that. But I know I'm going to get paid. I know that there's a reward for my work here. That's called high time preference, is where you don't want to wait for the results, but you're willing to take smaller results sooner rather than waiting longer for bigger results. A low time preference is when you're like, okay, I'm building something and I'm willing to sit here and build and build and build and reinvest all of the benefits that I get in the short term. I'm willing to reinvest those benefits and those profits into building a much larger business or a much larger enterprise so that I can get potentially more profits out of this down the road. So that's called risk taking, and entrepreneurs are good at this. Now, there is something where you get out over your skis. I've seen this. I have seen people start businesses with no capital, and not businesses that don't require a lot of capital, because if you're starting a print-on-demand business, there is ways to start it where you don't need a lot of money, and you just basically invest time instead of money. But you cannot start a business with no money and no time. You have to have one or the other. You have to either have some time or you have to have some money. And it does help to have a little bit of time and money. But if you're going to be starting a business and you don't know the costs, then you're taking a risk that is going to lead you into disaster, right? So if you're starting, let's say that you wanted to start a Amazon business and you're going to rely on Amazon advertising to build momentum for your product. Well, you're probably going to be in negative cash flow for a little bit, right? You're not going to be pulling in a bunch of profits, especially if you're trying to build your sales with advertising. Well, how much cash do you have? If you only have $1,000, that's probably not going to be enough. Now, on the other hand, if you wanted to build a Etsy store and you're just willing to sit there and work and make designs, and you're not planning on doing any advertising or anything like that, $1,000 is plenty. It's way more than you need to start that kind of business. But you also need to have the time to do it, or you need to have somebody who does have the time. So you got to know the cost before you begin. In fact, it says in the Bible, and yeah, I'm quoting the Bible. The Bible asks the question, would a builder start to build a building without knowing how much material he needs? Well, no. I mean, if you're going to build a house and you're like, well, I don't know how much lumber I need, but I'll just buy it as I go. That's not a good way to start a business, right? So when you start your business, you need to decide, how much risk can I afford to take here? And do I have enough to be successful before I begin? Either do I have enough time or do I have enough money to invest in this? Because you need one or the other. You can't just start a business and expect to spend no time and no money and be successful. All right, so that That is avoiding burnout by downsizing your life. If you guys like this kind of stuff, you can join my bootcamp series. I got a special bootcamp to teach you how to start your own print on demand store. You can find that salesondemandshow.com/start. Join the bootcamp. It's also my email list. And I don't send a lot of emails. In fact, I haven't sent an email for like 3 months. So I probably should send some emails. Anyway, guys, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Adios.